Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are setting the stage for what is honestly one of the most audacious historical heists of all time. And no, we aren't talking about stealing gold or, priceless art. We're talking about a military hero literally stealing an entire country. So here's the central mystery we're unraveling today. How exactly did a 30-year-old soldier, a guy hailing from the remote Italian-speaking island of Corsica, manage to hijack a high-stakes political plot and just establish himself as the absolute ruler of France? The stakes here couldn't have been higher, and the double cross he pulled off, it is absolutely legendary. But to understand how he actually pulled it off, we first need to understand the totally chaotic world he was operating in. Right, so to understand this heist, we really have to fast forward through the bloody decline of the French Revolution. Because by the last year of the 18th century, France had drifted a long way from those hopeful, idealistic days of 1789. Between 1793 and 1794, the country basically devolved into an absolute orgy of violence, a period known as the Great Terror. Under Maximilien Robespierre, thousands of people were guillotined. That is, until July 1794, when Robespierre himself lost his head. And that chaotic power vacuum ushered in a new conservative government known as the Directory. Now, this new government, the Directory, was incredibly fragile, and it highlights a really crucial lesson about history for us. Unstable, deeply unpopular regimes are massive targets for ambitious opportunists. Historians haven't been kind to the Directory, and for good reason. It was ruled by 5 directors, built on a totally unrepresentative voting system, purged radical Jacobins, and basically relied on extreme repression just to keep the country under Parisian control. So by 1799, this government was clinging to power by a thread. It was completely ripe for a takeover. And that brings us to our protagonist, the greatest son of the revolution. This is how a lot of people saw Napoleon Bonaparte when he returned to France in October 1799. He was a highly gifted 30-year-old guy from a very minor noble family. The absolute chaos generated by the collapse of the old regime had created incredible opportunities for him. Honestly, these were opportunities that simply wouldn't have existed for someone of his background just a decade earlier. And man, did he capitalize on those opportunities with lightning speed. Starting out as an artillery officer, he helped defeat a British royalist force at Toulon in 1793, and the promotions came fast. By 1796, he's commanding this ragtag army in Nice, completely humiliating both Italy and Austria. Then he leads this highly glamorous Egyptian campaign in 1798 to menace the British Empire, which just skyrockets his fame back home. So, by the autumn of 1799, sensing a massive political opportunity, he leaves his troops behind and returns to France as this famous, glamorous potential savior. But here's the thing, Napoleon wasn't the only one sensing blood in the water. Enter Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès. Now, Sieyès was actually one of the 5 directors of the government, but he was just as bitterly disappointed with his own regime as the public was. His plan was pretty straightforward. Capitalize on public anger, use the thousands of troops stationed around Paris, intimidate the government chambers into resigning, and install a brand new centralized regime. But to pull this off, Sieyès desperately needed popular support to make the takeover look legitimate. Okay, this is where the dramatic irony hits its absolute peak. Sieyès sees the public's wild adulation for Napoleon upon his return, and he thinks, perfect, here is my popular muscle, I'll just use this young general as a puppet to defend my new regime. But wow, did Sieyès completely underestimate him? Far from being a puppet, Napoleon was secretly planning a massive double cross. He intended to hijack the entire coup and seize absolute power for himself. So, the tactical strategy for the uprising actually began pretty smoothly. Step 1 went off without a hitch. Sensing something was very wrong, the directors resigned, and their executive system quickly collapsed. But the legislative branch of the government was split into 2 chambers, the upper chamber known as the Council of Ancients, and the lower chamber, the Council of 500. And unlike the executive directors, these 2 legislative chambers remained stubbornly defiant. They were definitely not just going to hand over the keys to the country. So on November 9th, with Sieyès occupied elsewhere in Paris, Napoleon decides to take matters into his own hands. Just imagine the sheer theatricality of this scene. Napoleon proudly marches right into the upper chamber, the Council of Ancients, and he doesn't go in alone. He is flanked by heavily armed, battle-scarred grenadiers. The Ancients tried to resist, but a blatant show of military muscle, combined with an effective speech from Napoleon, allowed him to intimidate them and walk out of that room completely unscathed. But here is where the tension really skyrockets. Intimidating the older statesman in the upper chamber was one thing. Would the coup fail in the lower chamber? The Council of the 500 was known to be far more radical, far more hostile, and you better believe they were ready for him. The very moment Napoleon steps into the lower chamber, absolute chaos erupts. He is immediately swarmed by furious politicians. They are screaming at him, threatening him, and many of them actually have drawn daggers in their hands. And in this critical do-or-die moment, the great military genius, the legendary hero of Italy and Egypt, completely freezes. According to reports, he was so paralyzed with fear, he came close to fainting right there on the floor. The entire heist was literally falling apart in real time. But then, we get this incredible, almost cinematic moment. Napoleon's own brother, Napoleon Bonaparte, conveniently happened to be the president of the lower chamber. Seeing the coup evaporating right before his eyes, Napoleon draws his own sword, points it directly at Napoleon's heart, and roars to the frenzied counselors, "If my brother is a traitor, I will kill him myself." I know, it was an incredibly ostentatious display of theatrics, but you know what? It worked flawlessly. Lucien's violent show of supposed impartiality shocked the room just enough to break the frenzy. It bought Napoleon the exact amount of time he needed to regain his composure, bring his soldiers in, and take back control of the situation. So, surrounded by bayonets, the Council of 500 was thoroughly intimidated and ultimately forced to sign a new constitution. The lawmakers had officially submitted. With the government dissolved, it was time for Napoleon to execute the final phase of his hijack. Remember Sieyès, the guy who started all of this? Well, Napoleon now commands thousands of deeply loyal soldiers right in the heart of Paris. Sieyès, suddenly realizing he has been entirely outplayed, is completely intimidated. With absolute military dominance, Napoleon just pushes Sieyès aside and personally alters the new constitution to favor exactly one man. And that one man was named First Consul. This newly created position granted one individual absolute power over the entire French state. And this is exactly why this specific historical moment matters so much to us today. By taking this title, Napoleon brought the French Revolution to a definitive close. The dream of a democratic republic, which had cost tens of thousands of lives over a decade of horrific bloodshed, was officially dead. It really goes to show just how quickly a weakened democracy can fall to a single, ambitious military opportunist. Because just a few years later, in 1804, Napoleon dispensed with even the pretense of a republic and officially declared himself Emperor of France. So I want to leave you with this question to think about. After all the terror, the guillotines, and the desperate struggle for liberty, did the French Revolution ultimately just trade the absolute rule of a king for the absolute rule of a general? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the history you think you know.